Hey everyone, I am Rachelle Rosenberg and I am a professional comic book color artist, currently exclusive for Marvel Comics. Some of my current books are Star Wars, Empire Captain America, Dr. Aphra, Ravencroft, and Spider-Man the Black Cat Strikes. This cover is done by Todd Knock and myself. Today I will be coloring one of Todd's Marvel live stream drawings of Captain Marvel. So Todd and I have been working together for quite a while, over 5 years. Our first comic together was Nightcrawler, and we are currently working on Gwen Stacy. If you guys are on social media, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and you can always check out my website. I do have prints available there for purchase. So let's go ahead and get started. This is, again, Captain Marvel by Todd Knock. He drew it previously on one of Marvel's live streams, so if you followed him during that, you can color this along with me. The first thing we're going to do is we need to kind of clean up the line art. It is a pencil drawing. It's not inked. If you guys are skilled in inking, feel free to ink this and then do the coloring. But I am not a skilled inker. So we will be altering the pencils a bit just to clean them up so that you can see the colors a little bit better. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to convert the image to grayscale. And then I'm going to open the levels property in Photoshop. And I'm just going to tweak the pencils a bit so that we get more pure blacks and we lighten up some of those previously red areas and kind of get rid of the more like sketch lines. And this is just really a matter of preference of kind of the look that you want to go for. All right. You could definitely go in and use the pencil tool or a paintbrush and clean this up a little bit more. But since we are kind of on a time clock here, we're going to leave this as is. So a lot of my followers ask about color holds. So we're going to set this line art up so that we can do color holds pretty easily. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my channels panel and I'm going to select down here at the bottom all of the line art. I'm going to inverse it. Going to create a new layer and I'm going to fill in that line art in black. So now basically we have just a black, no color, no white layer. And let's convert this to RGB. Don't merge. So I do work in RGB. Coloring is always finalized in cmyk. One of the reasons I work in RGB is because it's really hard to get glows and special effects that look really good in cmyk. It's easier to convert it, at least for me, easier to convert it to cmyk when it's done, and then if I need to, I can always adjust things afterward. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer and we're just going to fill it in white. So now we basically have our line art on one layer and then basically our paper. As a colorist, the first thing that we do is we create a flats layer. And I usually have other people do this part for me because I'm not great at it and I'm honestly kind of slow. But you can do, it's much easier to make any kind of changes when you have a flats layer. And this can be done, right now I'm using Photoshop, but this can be done in any of their computer programs. Like if you have an iPad and you're using Procreate or Clip Studio Art, a lot of people use. A lot of the platforms are very similar. You can always create layers in them. So I usually always put the line art on one layer, create another layer, which you can use for flats, and then you're gonna have like a working layer where we're gonna start painting on. So let's get started. I'm going to use the lasso tool to begin with, and we're just going to block out the entire image of Captain Marvel. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We can always go back and clean things up. I kind of just want to get her whole image, and then we'll go back in and refine the flats. And when you're doing flats, you really can pick whatever color you want to. I also use the pencil tool to go in and fill in spaces. Just help clean her up a bit. Flats is definitely one of the tedious parts of coloring. It's one of the reasons I usually don't do it myself. It's almost like busy work. Currently trying to train my kids to do it, especially now that we're coming into the summer. And they're going to need things to do so they're not bored. So I do usually use my pencil tool for some of the more detailed areas. I'm just a little faster that way. And once we have her all blocked in, we will start going in and separating the different colors. I do work on a Cintiq, but if you have a Wacom tablet or, like I said, an iPad with Procreate, all of these things can be done on that. Okay, so I'm just going to refine some of these shapes a bit, kind of like working the lines here. Make sure her hair is not all crazy. Whenever you're using the lasso tool, you want to make sure that your anti-alias button up at the top of the screen is turned off. This will create another line of pixels that won't get changed when you start changing the colors to be whatever you want them to be. And the same goes for your gradient tool and your paint bucket tool. you want anti-alias all turned off. Okay, so she's pretty well cleaned up. I'm going to start basically selecting the different parts on her. So there we see we have her whole body. So now I'm going to take the lasso tool and we're just going to start separating the different parts of her body and costume. And again, this can be whatever color. These are just flats, really just separating shapes here. And I usually do bigger sections and then I'll go in and do more details. So I'm going to separate the parts on her boots that are red. So I will be answering some questions today. And one of the first questions I've gotten is, do you prefer digital coloring drawing? And honestly, when I first started doing art, I swore I would never do digital. I was very anti-computer. Originally, I wanted to be an animator, and I loved hand-drawn animation. And when I know this is going to age me, but when I was growing up and it started moving into more computer animation, I was so mad because I just loved the look of hand-drawn cartoons or animated features. So when I went to college, I swore I would never do digital. I majored in illustration, focusing on oil painting, and then this crazy thing happened. I started learning and teaching myself Photoshop, and I really fell in love with it. I felt like I could get that more painterly look, even though it was on a computer. And at the same time, I didn't have to wait for things to dry. I didn't have to inhale toxic fumes. And so I really have a hard time going back to traditional mediums, especially, with the computer. You can always you can never really mess up. You can always hit the undo button. Yep, I'm going to use all crazy colors here. So we're still just separating out some of the details. Like I said, colors don't really matter right now. It's just about getting all those details separated. Getting her buttons and her piping on her suits. Get this piece on her glove that's supposed to be gold. Whoops. There we go. Okay. So for her face, I'm just gonna flat out her eyes and her teeth. Sometimes I leave the lips the same color as the face, just to help create a softer look on her. And then we'll do her eyes really quick. Okay. So once you have the flats kind of where you want them, everything is separated. It all looks pretty clean. the next thing we're going to do is I duplicate this layer. And the reason I do that is so I always have it. If I ever need to go in and select a certain area, it's much easier to select the flat layer than something you've been working on. Just gonna touch everything up here quick. All right. So I'm gonna go in, duplicate this layer, and I turn this layer off, and that will just be my flats layer. And you can even name it flats. And then this layer will be our working layer. Now I usually work on one main layer. Sometimes I will add some special effects, and we will do some special effects on this piece today. But I will try to keep it mostly to one layer. So now that we have this working layer, we want to start to lay in her final colors. Base colors. I usually work dark to light. Oops, let's see. I feel like that helps me with the lighting better. That's just how I see things. Everyone is different. There is no wrong or right way. And, you know, just because you put a color down doesn't mean you can't change it later. So even though I'm setting down these colors now, if you find that, you know, maybe her hair is too light, or it's not blonde enough, or her skin color's her tone is too dark, you know, you can always lighten it. You can always change it. I just like to kind of set a tone for what I'm going for here. And a lot of times what I'll do is once I have the base colors down, I'll go ahead and create another layer, and I'll either set it to hard light or even multiply, and I'll just adjust it. And this just kind of helps me to get those colors to be closer to one another, almost like you have like an underpainting going on. So I'll adjust that layer just a little bit, and then I'll merge it down into my working layer. It did change the background, so which is fine. We're gonna do something fun with the background later, but right now I'm just gonna change the background to white. All right. So let's get started with this. And I do have another question. How did you get your start at Marvel? And did it help being a digital colorist? So, man, working for Marvel has definitely been a dream come true for me. It was, as soon as I basically discovered that you could work in comics, that was my goal, to work for Marvel. And it's been a road, definitely quite the journey. I started, working for Image, to Boom, IDW, Devil's Due, Zenescope, and I literally worked my way up the ladder, going to conventions, meeting editors, doing tons of sample pages. I mean, you guys you can't ever give up. And I do feel like learning Photoshop, or any digital platform would help, especially with coloring, because most of it's all digital now. But I mean, the key is just to never give up. So let's start with lighting. With this image, usually when I have art, I'll look at it and I kind of have to be like, okay, so where's the shadows that the artist drew? Where is the artist envisioning the lighting? And this piece is pretty, it looks pretty simple. There's not a lot of harsh shadows anywhere. So we really could do whatever on this, but I'm going to kind of go for a light source that's coming from like right above here. So let's go ahead. We're going to start with her face. And I usually start with a pretty soft brush just to establish light source. And I just go in and just lightly just kind of, okay, the light's going to hit her on her forehead. It touches her cheek. Then I'll go in with a more painterly brush, smaller, and I'll kind of just add in the shadows where her hair is falling, under her nose, under her lips. Now, when you're coloring women, you don't want to go too hard on some of the shadows. Women tend to have softer features, so I try to keep things a little softer. You can add some blush to her cheeks, add a little bit of color. I do get lots of questions about my brushes. You can always contact me in my email and I will send you my favorite brushes. When I'm working, I literally only use like 3 or 4 brushes. I do have hundreds of brushes in my arsenal, but I don't hardly ever use any of them. Maybe some for special effects. So we're going to zoom in a little closer. Now you can see her eyes and her teeth are a little pink. Those are from the flats. That's okay. You can always change it. Get her eyes in. Sometimes when I do the eyes, depending on the line art, you know, especially with this, because it's a pencil, you can't really get a nice white highlight on her eyes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layer on top of the line art. And I'm just going to add a touch of highlight. Just really make her eyes pop. Eyes are definitely one of my favorite things to color, which is why we're doing it first. All right, so now let's go back to our working layer. And we're just gonna touch up her lips. As before, the lips were the same color as her skin, and just so I can help create like a softer lip look. All right, so we'll go ahead and select her hair. And hair is also another favorite thing that I love to color, especially long hair. It's very easy to get lost in it. And hair is one of those things you really want to try and keep soft. Sometimes when I'll get my flats back, I will have to adjust the flats because it's very easy to get hard lines in the hair when the flatters really just follow along the line art. But you can really have a lot of fun with hair. I just really believe the key is just to keep it very soft looking. We'll pop up a little bright highlight. Oh, another great question. My favorite character to work on. So I really love working on Phoenix. One of my books, it's probably been 1.5 years, 2 years. Phoenix Resurrection was a 10-issue series. And before I even had started it, Phoenix was, I mean, she's been one of my favorite characters. But I love coloring her hair, especially when it's got flames in it. There's just so much you can do with that. And like I said, hair is like one of my favorite things. So we'll kind of leave that there for now. We may pop a little bit more highlights at the end. But let's go ahead and get started on her costume. I'm going to start with the red, so I will select all of the red. And like I said, when you're selecting stuff, you want to make sure this anti-alias up at the top is clicked off. All right, so once we have the red selected, I'm going to go ahead and get my big airbrush. And we're just going to lay in the lighting. Just really rough. Just kind of to establish where we're going to go. All right, and then I'll grab a smaller, more defined brush that has pink on it. There we go. All right, so I do want to talk about, working with red. Red is one of those colors that can definitely change when you convert files for print. It can either turn really orange or really magenta. And so I find that the key to kind of help keeping it more red is to add a little bit of like purples into the base. And then when you're doing the highlights, it's easier to warm them up. And then in print, they definitely look more red, more true red. So working on her fingers here, let's zoom on in, get a little bit closer. Now that we've established our lighting, so we're coming in from above. I've had some people ask, how do you know like how to shade or where to shade? And honestly, it's just a lot of observing real life, watching how lighting falls on certain objects and paying attention to those things. There's different tools you can also use. I have this 3D head, and I think it's called planes of the face, but you can literally put a light on it and kind of see where the shadows fall. And it's definitely helped me learn where shadows fall on a face. And like I said before, you can't really mess up with digital. If you put something in and you're like, oh, that doesn't look right, it's always changeable. There's always the undo button. And with our flats, I'll show you guys in just a minute how we can go in, reselect something, and then change it to how you want it to look. So I'm just switching through a couple different brushes here. I do like to add more textures to my coloring. I think that comes from just training as a oil painter. I'm not really into the airbrush look. So just kind of moving down the page here. Work on her boots. All right. So now we're going to select the blue part. Again, grabbing that big airbrush. Going in and just laying in just some overall lighting. Maybe a little bit on her thighs here, her arms. And then once that's done, grab a smaller brush and then add in some of those highlights. Little extra details here. We are going to add in some reflective light also onto her costume. So whenever I do reflective light, I try to pick a color that's similar to what our background color is going to be. And today we're going to do kind of a, well, I'm going to do kind of a purpley background for Captain Marvel here. So I'm going to add a little bit of a purple as a reflective light to her costume. To really help her pop out. And we're just going to keep working a little bit lighter. So like I said, I do work dark to light. And I just kind of just keep building. You know, you can go too far, but like I said, you can always pull it back. So don't be afraid to push it. All right, we have another question. Is there a character you haven't gotten to work with that you want to? Honestly, I've been really fortunate. I'm not sure that there is a character that I haven't gotten to work with. I feel like I've pretty much colored probably almost everyone in the Marvel universe. I will say it's been a hot minute since I've done a good X-Men book, and I'm definitely longing to get back into the X-Men titles. Not that I don't love Spider-Man, and I absolutely love working on Star Wars, but I feel like X-Men was one of my first gigs with Marvel, and so it has a lot of nostalgia for me. All right. So we got our blue pretty much good. Let's work on some of the gold pieces. Now the gold is going to be a little bit more reflective. So we're definitely going to pop a little bit more highlights and add in some of that reflective light. And usually when I go in for highlights with things that are more shiny, you kind of want to stay away from the airbrush. I like to use more of a harder brush, kind of really make those highlights pop. We're going to add a little bit of red reflective light because that's the color that this gold is going to be reflecting. And up here, We'll do a little bit more of a cooler color. Okay. So now that she's pretty much colored, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into some of the details and just make sure she's looking good. So looks like I missed a little part here when I was flatting. So we're just going to pop that yellow in, and I need to add a little bit of highlights to her feet. So toward the end of the coloring, I'll try and, make sure all the highlights are popped. Make sure nothing is looking too dark. That's definitely something you have to keep in mind when coloring. You don't want your colors to overtake the line art. And I mean, her blue may be a tad dark for the pencils. So this is where we're going to use our flats. I'm going to go back to my flats layer, and I'm going to select the blue. Don't want her face. And from there, we'll go back into our working layer, and I'll just do a slight adjustment. So I'm just going to bring up the hue saturation, and I can just lighten this up a tad. And this is why the flats are so great. You can always go in and adjust things. I mean, we could even change her color entirely. But all I really want to do is just adjust the lightness just a little bit so we're not completely washing out Todd's amazing art. I'll also bring up the levels. This I can just maybe pop some of the highlights just a little. And I'm going to select her hair again, and I'm going to go in. I have this color dodge tool, and you want to use this sparingly, but this will help pop some of those softer highlights. Like I said, you really want to keep the hair soft, and this will help keep the hair soft, but it will still pop up some of those highlights that we want. All right. Okay, so now for the fun part. We're going to add a little background to this. First thing we're going to do, make sure to select the entire background. Make sure that anti-alias is turned off. And as I said before, we're going to kind of keep it a purpley background. So I'm just going to lay in a base purple color. And I'm going to make this a space background. So we kind of want it to look like it's got maybe like a nebula in there. So I'm just going to take a really big textured brush, and I'm just going to have some fun with this. We're going to add in some darker purples, maybe some pinks up at the top here. And honestly, you can really use any brush you have for this. I do prefer the textured brushes. It just creates more interest, I think. But if you have some cool like cloud brushes, you could use those. So just gonna lightly mix in a few colors here. All right. So once you kind of get the colors in like that, what we're going to do is we're going to take the pencil tool. And I'm going to just make it set it to white. And there are other tools you can use for this, but we're just going to create some stars. And what you want to do is you want to adjust the size of your brush. You want to make sure you're adding in different shape or different size stars. Whoops. If you have more of a spray brush, which I also have, you can use that. But like I said, you can use the pencil tool if you don't have one of these. And just go crazy. I mean, this is space, so we're gonna create lots of different little stars here. Maybe adjust the color a little bit so they're not all this bright white. All right. Gonna add a little bit of a gradient down here at the bottom just to help darken it. And maybe at the top here, and just adjust that a bit. All right, let's talk about color holds. Color holds is something I do a lot of. I had someone ask, when do you choose to do color holds? And honestly, it depends on, well, one, the artist. Some artists really prefer just the black line art. Todd doesn't seem to have a problem when I do color holds. I definitely use them for effects. I like to use them on clouds. Really anything to help maybe push it back. So if you have like mountains in the distance or any kind of buildings, you can use color holds to push that line art back and help create more depth. So for today, for Captain Marvel, we are going to color hold her powers. So because we already set the line art up for that, we're just going to click on that line art layer. And you want to make sure this lock is turned on. What that is going to do is that's going to allow us to literally take the pencil tool and color the line art. And it will only color the line art. If I had that lock turned off, I would literally just color over the line art, and we don't want that. So make sure that little lock is turned on. All right, I'm gonna lighten these up just a little bit because we are going to add a little bit of effect to them, and I don't want them to get lost. Okay, so once those are colored, we're going to create a new layer, and it's going to be a hard light layer. And I usually do all my glows on a hard light layer. So I'm just going to grab my big soft airbrush tool, and I'm going to lightly go over her powers that Todd drew. Just really help them to pop. And I have this really cool kind of splatter tool. Kind of get some sparks in there. Okay, I think that looks really good. I'm going to do one more thing here. Todd's name is in black, and because the space is so dark, I'm going to go back to my line art layer, and I'm going to pop his name out in white. And honestly, you could do whatever color you think looks good here. I mean, if you made the space background green or blue, and you want to do maybe a different yellow for the words. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sign my name right under his. And there you have it. Captain Marvel, drawn by Todd Knock, colored by me. I want to thank you guys all for joining me today. I've appreciated having all of you and all of your questions. Again, if you guys are on social media, please follow me. I do other tutorials, little quick things, and I love your questions. So keep them coming, and I'll try to answer them, make more tutorials for you guys. Thanks again.